Good evening. The sunset speaks with confidence, and yet only falls humbly from the little tiny sun, a droplet of plasma in the incomprehensibly vast depths of already deep space. And I am just a little human, a bug on little old Earth. So I may appear proud and sound stupid, but I am itsy bitsy compared to the uncountable mass of humans that ever lived in deep time. And I am stupid. Now, the sunset not only falls upon the land, but also on the surface of a grain of sand. The sunset falls upon an atom. Two tiny motes of meteors, floating in the depths of space, also have a sunset. So the Earth and the Moon, too, feel the sunset. Compared to the galaxy, they're like two microscopic bugs spinning merrily in the light of a firefly. When the firefly sets, this is called a firefly set, by the way. Fun fact. There are stars so large, though, that the sun beside them is like a firefly beside an adult human, and stars themselves congregate in the trillions, and the galaxies they form congregate in galactic clusters which are themselves shown tiny by the vast filamental colossus that they are like the cells of. In the cosmos, the light of the sun is like the faint cry of an ant, and the earth is like a quietly busy electron. So why does my body feel massive and bloated with its vast microscopic habitats of creatures, my micro, my microbiome, whose population outnumbers the many cells of my body? I'm so huge and eat vast amounts of sugar. Well, I'm nothing compared to the bloated atmosphere of Venus, with surface pressures that make Earth's atmosphere look more like a thin cloud. The only microbiome theoretically possible on Venus would live in the Venusian sky itself. You wouldn't even be able to see the sun on the surface, because the sky is just that dense. But if you could, it would take 8 hours for the sun to set. Still, from high in the sky, even Venus has a sunset. Come to think of it, even UFOs have sunsets. Well, aside from any that have invisibility shields, of course. This week, I like to collect news stories about birds. It may sound like a UFO and it may look like a UFO, but whatever it is, it's called ball lightning. That's right, we're talking about ball lightning. This is that point in our show. And I don't know what UFOs are, so I sat down for an interview with one. Unfortunately, the camera didn't work, so instead we'll talk about the real flying saucers, but they're the cheap and crappy ones. Flying trash saucers made of mylar that get stuck in your garden. All this and more tonight. I'm Rachel Nelson.
I'm Jeff Knox.
Welcome to UFO Sunset.
Hello, hello.
Any first words?
No, I guess we don't got Louise today, which is a shame. I have a feeling he may have spent more time looking into ball lightning over the past than I have. But I did read the chapter, both chapters, so.
Yes.
Yes.
As did I.
Cool.
I didn't actually read the chapters last week. I'm going to have to go back and read them. But I did these chapters, and they were both really, really interesting. Really important.
Yep. That first chapter shares a lot of similarities with a video that I'd previously shared on ball lightning that I tweeted out earlier again today.
Yeah.
And a lot of similarities to the kind of issues and methodologies required to investigate them as UFO sightings. So,
which is what we will be talking about.
Yes. Cool.
And now, and now for the rebrief. Humans continue training ibises how to migrate in a changing climate. The 17th human-led migration of northern bald ibises is currently underway, having begun on August 13th from Taching am See, Bavaria, excuse my pronunciation. It will end in Vejer de Frontera in Andalusia. This is only the second migration that will end in Andalusia and is also a longer migration at 2,800 kilometers. The migration is led by the Walprop team, a conservation and research organization in Austria who restored the northern bald ibis from extinction in Central Europe beginning in 2002. The species went extinct in Europe and was hunted nearly to extinction in the 17th century. The team started a breeding program and reintroduced 300 ibises into the wild. Since birds like the northern bald ibis in the wild learn how to migrate from older generations, it's necessary for the team themselves to teach this to the birds they introduce into the wild. So they guide the ibises using an ultralight plane equipped with a large rear propeller and a parachute used for lift. As reported in an article on this story by Bobby Hardy and Stephanie Dazio, which was published today in the Associated Press, using an ultralight plane was first developed in the 1980s by Bill Lishman, founder of the nonprofit Operation Migration, to guide Canada geese and then the endangered whooping crane. It was necessary for the Waltrop team to change the migration route from ending in Tuscany to a longer route ending in Andalusia, Spain in 2023 and again this year due to climate change. The ibises leave for their migration later in the year, which means that they cross the Alps when the temperature is colder, and warm air currents called thermals that give the birds lift are no longer present. The journey may take 40 to 50 days. A new lovebird was identified from the cradle of humankind. A new species of lovebird was identified from 96 bones found in Kromdry, Cooper's Cave, and Svartkrans, 3 limestone caves in the cradle of humankind. This cave complex, located near Johannesburg, South Africa, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the findings of various hominin remains there. The new species, Agapornis longipes, lived around 2.5 million years ago. It was the smaller species of lovebird and had the smallest ratio of its forearm to leg bones among all known lovebird species, which suggests the bird may have fed on grass seeds in the safety of tall grasslands. An open access paper describing the species was published online August 9th in the journal GeoBios with lead author Marco Pavia. It was reported on by Girl Scientist in Forbes magazine on Friday. Wow! Was the wow signal a laser from space? A team of researchers led by Abel Mendez at the University of Puerto Rico, Arecibo, published new findings on the famous WOW signal. This was a powerful signal detected by the Big Ear Radio Observatory in 1977, distinctive for its narrow band of frequencies around 1420 megahertz, resembling the frequency emitted by the element hydrogen. The signal has remained mysterious since this time, but the Arecibo team published new findings on August 16th on ArcSiv. The team surveyed data collected in 2020 by the now-defunct Arecibo Observatory in order to find similar signals. They found multiple signals which appeared to originate from clouds of hydrogen in deep space. The wow signal, the new findings suggest, may have been amplified by a magnetar or a soft gamma repeater. These are neutron stars that emit powerful bursts of microwave radiation called masers, which are similar to laser beams. From the abstract, quote, our hypothesis explains all observed properties of the wow signal, proposes a new source of false positive in proposes a new source of false positives in technosignature searches, and suggests that the wow signal could be the first recorded event of an astronomical maser flare in the hydrogen line. Unquote. And now for Ufos Chat.
What was that movie? Remember with the young woman that flies the plane to guide the geese in their migration? Remember that movie?
You know what? I have an article that actually mentions the name of that somewhere. Oh, I don't have it open. Sorry. Let's see. Hold on a second. I can find it for you.
I forget what that was called, but I remember watching that when I was a kid. So
yeah, that's about the
yeah, the bird story just reminded me of that. Like, yeah, the
Operation. It's about Operation Migration, but it's like not really faithful to what actually happened entirely.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see.
And that's interesting about the wow signal. I'll have to. I have a thread for the wow signal. I'll have to add that to it. There was already, I believe, like just a year ago, there was already another theory or explanation, but I can't recall off the top of my head what it was. But yeah, the wow signal, unfortunately, is kind of like a UFO sighting. It was very quick and just non-repeatable event that, you know, there's not a whole lot you can really do with it at this point, I don't think. But
yeah,
if it has a natural scientific explanation, that makes sense. I mean, people thought things like fast radio bursts like were signs of intelligent life for, you know, a while, but it's really just natural processes, astrophysical processes that are creating them. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
He's home with the plane. This is what Fly Away Home. That's what I thought it was. Yeah.
Yes, Fly Away Home. Sorry, you distracted me by talking.
With Anna Paquin. Yeah, a young Anna Paquin and Jeff Daniels is in it. Yeah. That's 1996. Cool.
Okay, so before we get to, so first we're going to have more of an open, okay, actually, yeah. So first, I kind of wanted to talk about some other stuff before we get into the reliability of UFO witness testimony.
Okay.
Let me see here. Okay, so I had this idea that I wanted to talk about, and I think it might have been possibly introduced elsewhere prior to me, you know, because I'm pretty illiterate. But basically, the idea is, let me read this. Okay, so a common misconception among both materialists and believers is that the claim that something, for example, the self, is an illusion, is incompatible with a claim that such a thing exists. Nagarjuna, Zhuangzi, and other ancient sources reject different forms of this type of error. Not only do coyotes exist in the earth, coyotes also exist in the coyote world, and both things happen in the same reality. Not only is an objective report accurate, but humans also exist in our own psychological and social domains. Skepticism and belief support each other. Not only does having a physical explanation not destroy the spell of high strangeness, but that high strangeness exists in human terms. But that high strangeness exists in human terms does not negate that the physical world also exists. Hence, empiricism and the para-weird are compatible. One simply has to view the two domains in holistic terms. That's not phrased perfectly, and what I'm saying is kind of difficult to describe, but basically, I think that basically what I'm trying to say is that the psychosocial interpretation is not incompatible with the psychosocial interpretation is not incompatible with, I guess, the experience of high strangeness. So I guess, like, I'm so sorry. I don't know why, but it's really hard for me to just talk on this show and to talk live on YouTube. But basically, what I'm saying is that to have previously on the show, I talked about the distinction between emic and etic, and I also talked about the work of Christopher Hitchens, where he talks about being like studying religion in such a way that you become a caretaker of religion, basically. And what I think is that people so you have people that approach the paranormal as participants and want to experience the paranormal, and they use various methods of doing that. And then on the other hand, you have people who try to come to explanations of the paranormal through rationalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And empiricism. And what I've noticed is that there is a tendency on one side to reject science, and to reject certain aspects of intellectualism, like certain fundamental aspects. And then on the other side, you have a tendency among skeptics, I think, to be reductive, basically. I mean, and that's a common way of how it's described, but I think it's worthwhile to describe it with more nuance than that. I think that there's a tendency in skepticism basically to just dismiss like an emic accounting of things, to simply dismiss someone's personal experience, or to dismiss elements of it, or of that narrative. And I think that what's going on is that people aren't seeing the whole picture. Like, people on both sides are not seeing the whole picture because they're both missing out on the other side of the picture. And what I always want to do is to try to understand the whole thing systemically, right? But to have a full systemic understanding, you can't simply have a reductive explanation, because that sort of removes a human element that's really important, like what I might call like a functional human element.
Yeah, I mean, I think most skepticism is scientific skepticism. It's based on scientific methodology, and which is based on things that like we can verify and actually test. And it's not so much based on personal experience and anecdote. That's more like the realm of, ethnography and folklorist and people that study like the phenomenology of experience. It's not something that can per se be scientifically tested, and most skeptics are coming from a scientific skepticism kind of point of view. That being said, I think both points of view are perfectly valid ways of studying the topic. And really, when it comes to UFOs, all we actually have usually is personal experience to analyze. Like, we rarely have physical evidence, that we can analyze, or the evidence we have is like ambiguous at best, blurry photos or alleged traces after the fact. But you need both of them. But I at the same point, I understand why skeptics dismiss things that can't be demonstrated, that just come from personal experience, because there's really, you either have to accept what they're saying is valid or you have to dismiss it. But you can't really prove it either other way. So, that's why I think when people like people get mad at Mick West, for example, but the pilot said this, he's not taking into consideration what the pilot said. Well, because the problem is, like I said, that's just witness testimony, and it's old witness testimony. And we know how unreliable witness testimony is. So when you're trying to study something skeptically from a scientific viewpoint, you're not going to get a whole lot of places with just kind of like witness testimony and personal experience. That doesn't mean their personal experiences aren't totally valid and worth, recording, taking down, and studying. It's just not going to get us anywhere scientifically speaking.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they're really it's really, I think, about what you're trying to do a lot of the times. People that are participating in the paranormal, they have very different objectives from people that are trying to study the paranormal. And so Swink asked, what are those holistic terms from, he's talking about what I read before. At the end, I said, empiricism and the para-weird are compatible. One simply has to view them, the two domains, in holistic terms. I think really what I would say the terms are generally, broadly speaking, would be like would be non-duality. And I've talked about this in other places and other ways in the past. Basically, what that means is that, that the paranormal doesn't exist. Like, let's suppose that the paranormal or the supernatural or something like that exists in this different substrate of reality. Ultimately, though, all substrates of reality exist in the same reality. And human experience, human activity, human culture is all centered around this kind of human substrate of reality, right? It's sort of like if you imagine the holodeck. The holodeck has its own kind of world, but that world is still inside of our world and is made up of all of its constituent parts are from our world, right? The holographic projector is a physical machine, and the information used to create this simulated environment, all of that information exists in the physical world. And in the same way, like the physical world, the material world, seems like it's somehow separated from our experience of it. Like where Descartes had this thought experience, or this thought experiment of like, imagine looking in the mirror, but you don't see anything there. And what he was trying to describe was a
vampire.
No, not a vampire. He was trying to describe, he was arguing that the soul exists independently of the body, and he was describing for a kind of Western dualist in the tradition of like Neoplatonism sort of view of the spiritual and the physical being these two separate domains. I think what's really happening is that all domains of reality, all substrates of reality, ultimately collapse down to the same reality. And so it's useful to view them in a dual way sometimes, but sometimes it's not useful to view them in a dual way. Like if you want to view both at the same time, like if you want to view, well, anyway, basically what I'm saying is that both of those things are like the human domain and the material world are both things that exist and are both important, and they're both significant, but in different ways. And so I think that this has just general implications for UFO studies. Because what this means is that you can look at UFO studies from an emic point of view or from an etic point of view. Or alternatively, again, you can look at it from a material sciences point of view. This is a different dichotomy here, but you can look at it from a material sciences point of view, or you can look at it from a, the point of view of a cultural anthropologist, looking at trying to understand what is it like to participate in UFO culture, or to try to be an experiencer, or to try to pursue having UFO related experiences. Both are important, I think. And I mean, so I want to talk about gender too, because gender is related. Now, there's that show Liminal, which is a paranormal show that is hosted by Dash Kwiatkowski that just, is on YouTube now.
I've never watched it though.
Well, it's largely, I mean, I enjoyed it. It's a lot of it is, it's a paranormal show where they're going out and doing divination and stuff like that. And but Dash, they propose that basically that the paranormal and gender, that the paranormal and transgender and non-conforming gender, non-binary gender, that these are fundamentally related. And I think that's true in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't think that they're intrinsically connected to each other. Like if you're trans, then that puts you in a position of being like a medium or something like that, or a shaman or something like that. I think that in a lot of cultures, there's like a sacred role for additional gender categories and additional gender identities. But I don't think that, I mean, I kind of just view it differently, but my main point is really that gender and UFO stuff works and using some of the same sorts of systems. And so you can kind of understand both of them better, by looking at these systems in similar ways. So there's this common idea that, that transgender is something that hasn't been proven, that it hasn't been proven scientifically, as something that originates somehow physically in the body, like that it's a medical mystery, right? But in reality, gender, just like UFOs, is largely centered around psychosocial studies. The way I've always defined gender is as the psychosocial aspect of human sexuality. So what that means is, the way that I describe it is how we represent our sexuality. And this, I came up with this sort of way of conceptualizing it mind you, I'm not an expert. I came up with this way of conceptualizing it independently of Judith Butler, but I think that this actually lines up with Butler's description of gender as well. Butler basically describes gender as how people behave around sexuality. So basically, the way of thinking about it is like, if you think about an organism has sexuality, which are the systems in that organism that are used to procreate, specifically, exchanging genes to procreate. But when we talk about that, us talking about that is not sexuality. It's actually a part of gender. And like if a doctor talks about sex or a medical researcher talks about sex, they're talking about sex. They're trying to model human and animal and whatever biology. And through doing that, however, they are actually engaged in gender. And so like, so when people are like, say like, oh, well, you can't prove that you're such and such gender identity because there's not the medical evidence for it. It's a red herring, and it's not really based at all in how trans feminism positions gender, right? And or how most gender studies in general, positions gender, because that's not how gender is defined. Gender is defined as like the psychosocial aspect of human sexuality. And so implicit in that idea is that gender is, largely just constructed by people, and so yeah, there's no real necessity to actually prove anything about someone's gender. The real discourse, the real concern for trans people and for non-binary people is that we have a legitimate state, like that we basically have sexual autonomy in society, right? Well, I mean, we want, like this, like the trans rights movement is not just one right, but all of those rights are, I think, intrinsically connected. A big part of that is just having control over our bodies, but really fundamentally too, a huge concern is that our sexual identities have the same legitimacy in society and in culture as cisgenders. It's not that we're deluded, that we're just like, that we think that we're something that we're not, that we believe things about our body that aren't true. Like no trans person sees the world or themselves that way. And, the very fact that we experience dysphoria around our gender is because of that. And so there are a lot of people who are transphobic, who are actively against trans rights. And there are also a lot of people just in society who just don't really understand transgender experience, who, then will hear these like polemics online and in the news about gender and about transgender. And, they'll come to this idea that, that basically transgender people are just making stuff up, and this is just sort of a fad or a trend or a mania, right? But in reality, like there are people all over the world who, who basically identify and behave in such ways that, like that match up with the definition of trans in our culture. And there are many people in other cultures who have these other gender identities who identify as trans just because because they want more freedom, and they're trying to ally with people across the world. And, you know, like, so there's a global trans movement, like, and yeah, you know, like, so I think that, like, the way that people ontologically misunderstand gender, like, is basically is often very similar to the way that people ontologically misunderstand uncanny and paraweird experience, basically, where, you know, they look at, like, you look at UFOs and you think, oh, this is like just all made up or something, right? But if you look at it from the point of view of an experiencer, it's like, well, it's more than that, though, because it's important. Like, you know, like, it's important to who I am and what's happened to me in the past, you know, and what my relationship is to the universe, you know. I'm not, I wish I could describe my thoughts better. I'm trying really hard.
Well, when it comes to UFOs, just because you interpret something through a psychosocial model or try to come up with a psychosocial kind of explanation for things, you're still not saying it's made up, like they fabricated events or they hallucinated events. Like there was a real experience. There was typically even a real stimulus. There was a real event. Like, it's not made up. It's real. It's just the model in which you interpreted it through, and kind of that's like what you're trying to study. And that's why I think it's important. And like I've talked before, like I used to be a really nuts and bolts guy. I'm not really interested in the more experiential kind of side of things, but I'm really into that stuff now, because, like I said, a lot of this topic really is just people's experiences and analyzing it. And even if those experiences don't, you know, reduce down to something truly paranormal happening, there's still a lot we can learn by studying like these mental models that people have and develop, and the way they kind of come to believe they have these experiences. So I think it's important to catalog and study this stuff, just as important as it is to set up, like, you know, instrumentation setups to kind of monitor for UFOs, because it's just as big, if not a bigger part of the phenomenon. So
yeah, and I think, yeah, that's another point, is that, you know, I don't think, you know, being, you know, documenting and studying what people do, like, destroys that necessarily. Like,
yeah,
you know, and I think that's one of my main points, really, is that I see this kind of this mentality of, like, you know, these two worlds are just incompatible with each other. But it's like, well, actually, I think it's actually really necessary that people in the occult and in parallel, you know, paraweird and like sort of broader UFO culture, like, that I think it's really important that we try to be promoting critical thinking and, you know, fighting against anti-intellectualism.
yeah,
And and I think a lot of anti-intellectualism arises out of this kind of false dichotomy of, you know, well, it can't be, you know, it has to be one or the other, it can't be both. But in fact, it is both. And like, I think the Mylar balloon case that we're going to be talking about, the Amaranth case, is potentially a good example of it. But maybe if not, I think I can frame it in a way that kind of helps illustrate the idea.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of sorry that we didn't do the book club first, but basically, in the case, what in the chapter they offer this explanation for the case, which is basically, you know, that it was a Mylar balloon, and but it's interesting because there's this sort of process that you go through in reading the chapter that I think is kind of a familiar sort of process that I have gone through a lot in my life, where, you know, I read the beginning, you know, just reading the account, you know, you got this person in their home, and, you know, they see this thing come out of the sky and come down into your yard, and it's like this weird shiny object, and then it stops and stays there for 20 minutes, and then it just flies off pretty, faster than it came. And like, I read that and I'm like, okay, like there was a big, there's like this kind of feeling, that I have inside of me. It's like, there's no way that they're going to have some rational explanation for this, even though I know that they're going to have a rational explanation for it. And I'm probably going to be like, yeah, that's a more plausible explanation. And then I read through it and I'm kind of like, I don't know if this can be a balloon. I'm just not buying it. And then I read further and I was like, okay, yeah, it's probably, that's a very plausible explanation. Like, and so, there is that kind of sense of disappointment, but, trying to put myself in that scenario, imagining if it happened to me, I still find that to be a really fascinating experience, because I don't think that they're like, an actual object came out of the sky and flew down into this guy's yard, and it did something really, really weird. It just sat there, and it did it because of some just random, branches were kind of like in the right place to create this illusion that it was actually just levitating, and then it flew off, and that actually happened. Like, it was, in a sense, an actual flying saucer, right? Like, but it was also a Mylar balloon. And like, and not only that, but like, it's like, if you were there, if I was there, like, would I have had the same experience, and
Yeah.
And also,
maybe it would help we hold this off until we've actually explained the case and shown people so they know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, I kind of explained it a little bit. I think I explained it enough to.
But unless you understand.
But when we go through the case, we'll definitely have more to say, and we can return to this too, and because I think I might have more to say by that point. So I just have to forgive people that on this show, I'm really terrible at talking on this show, and it's something that I just really need to work on more, or at least maybe I feel that way, and maybe I'm not actually that bad at talking on the show.
Mm-hmm.
But I just like there's
say that's kind of the benefit of taking like a phenomenological approach to like studying this stuff and doing phenomenological reduction, and where you're just kind of bracketing off, like you're not trying to figure out like if their experience is real, you're just trying to kind of like analyze and categorize and figure out the core features of these experiences that these people are having. And you're bracketing off and putting aside any, whether or not it's actually real or their experience happened or not. You're just trying to study the core features of the phenomenon and the experience. And I think there's a lot of benefit to doing that, just setting aside. And that's kind of like what you're supposed to do when you investigate a case too. Like, just kind of set aside your personal, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, and just kind of like get their experience, get their narrative, what they saw, their report, without kind of introducing any beliefs or opinions or thoughts onto it. You're just kind of separating that out. And I think that's a good approach to take when studying this topic, is to kind of like study the experience and kind of leave your thoughts out of it if you can. So
well, I think that that is an important thing to do. But I think also that another thing too is that it's really important to understand that a lot of different approaches are really important. Just talking in terms of science, like doing qualitative research, like just like, for example, just studying one case really in depth, or documenting one case really, really in depth in order to get all of the information about it, or doing things like studying in the field sociocultural events and stuff like that, from just like you're saying, like documenting it. But like, yeah, I think a lot of people kind of approach this from a very materialist, like people that are interested in it from a very scientific point of view. They approach it from a very quantitative point of view, which is really important and good and useful. Like doing stuff like what Mick West does, like analyzing video and trying to figure out distances and positions and stuff like that. I think that's all very important stuff. But also, documenting things from a qualitative point of view by documenting just people's accounts, and looking at things from the point of view of a field anthropologist, like Thomas Bullard, going to abduction and documenting abduction events for abductees and stuff like that. I'm sorry. Yeah. I should just quit apologizing. It is what it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's why I study the history. I don't think the history amounts to scientific evidence at all of any valid use that would ever prove anything, but I still find it all very fascinating to actually study, both from a historical point of view, a folklore, or mythological, and an anthropological point of view. Like it's all fascinating information to study and like look at. That is a very little to no actual, from a scientific point of view, use. So
history is not, I think history and science have overlap with each other. But history is more about how we basically account for what happened, like, and is not necessarily an objective documentation of physical events or something like that. A lot of history can't even, like if you talk about, like, say, like a country or something like that, or a religious belief or something, like a lot of stuff that you find in history doesn't even have any correlation with physical stuff. It's just stuff that people made up,
Yeah. And then there's stuff that people believe was made up that turns out to have grains of truth in it. So,
Well, no, I just mean like a country is made up, like we think of a country as being real, but it's not objectively real. It's only really real for us.
Most things are made up. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is that there's that whole
concepts we agree upon to use in our lives.
And that, like, I think what I'm trying to do is just like explain what I believe. And that's a really important thing to understand, is that I don't approach this as someone who's like a non-participant. I do approach it as a participant, but I think that being, like as someone who, wants to find out like the truth about UFOs, like, and who has their own positions and beliefs and acts on those, in this milieu, and then in this subculture, and in this sort of social environment surrounding UFOs. And that's basically sort of what I believe is that, like our world is constructed, but that doesn't mean it's like, that you can just be dismissive of it, or just like, like reduce it out of existence or something like that. It just means that it's a different aspect of reality, basically. that exists in the physical world, but also at the same time, our understanding of our own human domain is not the same as our understanding. It's a physical domain, but those two domains exist within the same larger domain and are interacting with each other and overlap with each other.
Yeah.
Yes, I am explaining my ideology.
Ufology is, the multidisciplinary study of, things that experiences and things that people see, unidentified objects that they can identify, so it involves all sorts of different ways of looking at it, and they're all perfectly valid ways of approaching this topic, and they all have ways of contributing. So
yeah, well, and I also think too that like you can, you don't have to like I think that like if you want to have a rationalist understanding of UFOs, that doesn't mean that you can't also have like spiritual beliefs about UFOs and the paranormal. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I don't think that doing like trying doing things to like elicit paranormal experiences, that this can only be done in a separate world from like you cannot do this and also turn around and study the same type of thing empirically. I fundamentally think that that's not true. I just think that like, yeah, there are certain things you have to do so that one doesn't like, make the other one dysfunctional, or that they both make each other dysfunctional. I think for me, I've always wanted to try to understand UFOs from, not always, but like once I started to understand the importance of psychology to UFOs, then I started to be like, okay, I really want to understand this from every side. And to me, I think that requires, not only having that it means not only having like trying to look at it from an empirical, scientific point of view and like a rational point of view, but also to look at it from a spiritual view as well, just in the proper contexts where I'm able to do that, basically.
Yeah. I would argue also that just people need to, for example, there's a lot of people like, if you share a paper, an academic paper, that's like a religious studies aspect of the UFO phenomenon, a lot of people will get really angry and be like, oh, this is debunker stuff. You're just saying it's nonsense, that it's just crazy religious stuff. It's like, no, just because you study, for example, like the religious aspects of the phenomenon doesn't also mean that there's nothing like physical or real per se to the phenomenon. Like there's all these different ways we can look at it. And just because you look at it one way doesn't mean you reject the possibility of other possible ways of looking at it. Like it's just one avenue or one route that you can study this. And that's why I think it's crazy when people get mad, like say you post a religious paper or you post a psychology paper or you talk about the chapters in this book. People act like you're just a debunker that thinks there's nothing to the topic. It's not worth studying. It's like, if it wasn't worth studying, if there's nothing to it, we wouldn't be reading these papers and these chapters and these books. Like this is just one other avenue that you have to study and understand when you study this topic. It doesn't take away from the other ways and the other, approaches. It's just one approach.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And I mean, this doesn't directly, sorry. Okay. Anyway, shoot, I lost it. Dang it. Okay. Sorry. I was going to say something. I forgot what it was. It was good too, I promise. It was a UFO of a point.
UFO?
It was like really one of those spectacular close encounter type UFOs.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to do these 2 chapters now?
Yes, I do.
Do you have I don't know if like you can do like you did last time, the ball lightning one, just like bring the PDF up in a window, scroll through it.
I can do that. Yeah.
Cool. Anyways, I guess so. This ball lightning chapter and the reliability of UFO witness testimony was called "Investigating Ball Lightning: Eyewitness Reports" by Alexander G. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Cool. It's Keul. Cool. And
I want to say it's Coil.
Coil.
I mean, it's that would be the German pronunciation or something like it, probably.
Huh.
Like Freud.
Yeah. Cool. I'll just read the abstract real quick here. Ball lightning and UFOs as unsolved phenomena appear side by side in many news articles and popular books. The term ball lightning has been used since Arago in 1837 for unexplained metastable lightning forms that appear at random in time and space and last for seconds. For both classes of transient phenomenon, most of the incoming material is anecdotal. Thus, serious investigation needs to consider and evaluate social as well as natural science data. However, ball lightning theories still outnumber critical field investigations. The author, meteorologist, and psychologist involved in ball lightning studies since 1974 explains his examination of witness reports and related evidence, highlights BL cases, statistics, and delineates obstacles and chance for a potential scientific revolution. And so in this paper, he basically just he kind of gives a history of ball lightning, and there's a lot of different names that have been given to ball lightning depending on the countries. Like over the years, like der Kugelblitz, like in Germany. A term I was more familiar was the Hungarian term for ball lightning, which I'm probably mispronouncing wrong, Gurnbalam. Because there's a ball lightning researcher that I've shared some books and work of his, and his books were called Gurnbalam. And he basically shares some of the similarities kind of these ball lightning incidences are pretty similar kind of problems that we have with investigating kind of UFO reports. So kind of these ball lightning makes its appearance basically kind of almost random in time and place. It doesn't last very long, typically for a few seconds. And it usually ends without leaving any sort of kind of traces. And this is, pretty similar to the kind of situation we have with UFO reports. They tend to be, transient. They happen quickly, and there's not much. They don't tend to leave, physical ground or other kind of traces, except in kind of rare situations. But kind of like UFO reports, he explains that the existence of ball lightning seems beyond doubt after thousands of similar reports. But hard scientific evidence in the form of photos, films, or residue, or a consensual theory or empirical convincing laboratory simulation is largely missing. So we have, again, similar kind of situation in UFOs. We got thousands of stories. We even have some photos, even some trace data, but it's all, kind of lacking and doesn't seem to be enough to prove what's going on. And he talks about the kind of explain how there's been multiple kind of theories that have been given over the years on ball lightning. There's kind of, they break them down into like 16 different categories, or 2 main kind of categories: models where the kind of the energy to sustain the ball comes from the inside, and models where the energy is obtained from an external source like atmospheric fields, antimatter meteors, electric fields from the ground. And they give another kind of a definition they came up with for ball lightning in 1976. Appearance in thunderstorms, often near cloud ground lightning, round shape, less than 1 meter, color mainly orange to red, opaque, and self-luminous. Continuous or irregular movement, sometimes motionless, frequently penetration into buildings, lifespan seldomly over several seconds, with noise or noiseless. Also in the final phase, mostly without traces, i.e. damage or injuries. And they give a lot of statistics kind of in this paper, where most sightings do tend to take place during thunderstorms. and they also found a correlation between there's different kinds of lightning. There's cloud to ground lightning, lightning to cloud lightning, and then there's different kind of polarities for the lightning. And they did find a correlation between ball lightning and strong positive cloud to ground strikes. But just some of the general statistics they kind of found is that most cases tend to happen during these thunderstorms, typically 50 to 80%, although in the US, it was up to like 85% of ball lightning cases happen during thunderstorms. Most of them tend to, like I say, they last 40 to 80%, typically fall within 1 to 5 seconds. Most cases, no more than 20 seconds. And 80 to 90% of the time, they're reported as circular around objects. Something that's quite interesting is the distance, average distance is typically less than 5 meters in 50 to 70% of the cases. So that means these sightings tend to be in close proximity, which I found quite interesting there.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too.
And they all seem to be average, mean to medium fits in the interval of 10 to 50 centimeters. And like I said, they tend to be yellow, red, or white, which is also kind of interesting because a lot of the kind of the fake ball lightning videos and kind of stuff you see on the internet, people talk about blue balls of light, but blue ball lightning seems to actually be quite rare. It typically tends to fall within these yellow, red, white kind of colors. And in most cases, they're not even kind of dazzling bright. They say only 10 to 25% of cases kind of have this bright, intense, dazzling kind of color to them. Most of them aren't. They say the typical movement of ball lightning is usually just on a horizontal plane. Occasionally there's some erratic movement, but rarely does it tend to move upwards. And something I found also kind of very interesting is how often they explode. The ball lightning sightings end in explosion in up to 50% of the cases, which is quite interesting. In the US, it's up to 74% of the cases. So I was not aware that ball lightning typically ended explosively, where it just kind of goes off. They also mentioned that noise isn't very common. Noise is only heard in 15 to 20% of cases. Smelling odors, it occurs, but it's very rare, only 7 to 15%. So I found it very interesting to me. That definitely implies there's some sort of natural kind of like process going on in these thunderstorms. Now, there are cases where they don't happen in thunderstorms. They're rare, but they do happen. But just like I think with UFOs, there can be many different ways that these can be created. And they talk about some experiments that they performed to kind of simulate or try to recreate these kind of like plasma balls, where they basically kind of created lightning strikes on these different surfaces and particles and stuff, and to see kind of how long they could generate these kind of balls and what they would look like, and so that demonstrates there's at least there's not necessarily just one scene. There could be multiple causal mechanisms. So most of them happen in thunderstorms, but some of these other cases could have different factors at play. Some of them imply that there's some sort of like a particle that kind of initiates that evaporate during lightning strikes. Or you can imagine those little microspherules. Maybe that's maybe lightning hits something metal burns, and we get all these little microspherules on the ground afterwards. But what we see is the plasma burning of that metal, when it strikes. Who knows? But so it's important to realize there could be multiple explanations as to why these kind of balls of light happen. It's not necessarily just one single phenomenon. Is there anything you remember about the paper you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. What's that?
There's a couple cases they talk about.
Yeah, they talk about a few different cases. What I found, I mean,
Oh,
there's
the
a lot. I think
psychology section.
there's actually a lot that I can talk about in this chapter, but I can't remember most of it. But one thing I thought was interesting was this one picture. Yes, this one right here on the left.
Oh, the Montafon ball lightning photograph.
Yeah, and they were talking about how it actually looked sort of like a falling, burning object.
Yeah, that was struck by lightning, and is the burning something falling? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was wondering, is it just like a bird or something? Like was it a bird that got hit by lightning and then just
Yeah, I don't know. That's
to
very
a
interesting.
comet? Yeah.
One of the things I found kind of most interesting about the paper was the psychology section, because it kind of
Well,
relates also to how.
before you get into that, the reason that I found that interesting is that it started to make me think about, like just like as they pointed out in the paper, their ball lightning might not be a singular phenomenon, but it could actually be multiple different phenomena. And I think that there's clearly a range too from phenomena that are more mundane to more exotic, right? Like like some ball lightning might be buoyant plasmas or something, but others might be like birds getting struck by lightning or things like that. There could be a lot of different weird reasons why people would see a ball of light in the sky.
And they talk about a few examples as well where the people what they consider kind of false sightings of ball lightning, or things that in the media get attributed to ball lightning that probably were just things like lightning strikes causing a fire, but it wasn't ball lightning that actually caused the damage. It was just a standard kind of lightning fire that occurred. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of false kind of ball lightning kind of like events that kind of get attributed to in the media. And they talk about how even insurance companies sometimes are more likely just to accept a ball lightning kind of explanation, than, something more complex, like lightning caused an oversurge in the power circuits, which, caused an electrical fire to burn kind of a house down or whatever. And if you actually look at some of these, this mentions that the damage is rare in a lot of these cases. If you look at this Hungarian guy's book on it, he kind of just has a whole ton of cases where he actually claims physical damage. He shows these houses and burns and like melted glass, in windows, and like stereo systems on the wall that the plastic's all melted. And so he's just got a ton of cases which he claims physical damage. But I can't help but wonder, looking at a lot of those, how many of those were just electrical fires that occurred for whatever reason or not, that later got attributed to ball lightning. And this, that kind of gets into what he talks about, like with mental models, is how like these people, like when you have kind of a non-qualifiable, obscure, incomplete information, and they're trying to interpret, their experience. So when they find a round hole in a wall after a thunderstorm, to them, that in their mental model becomes proof ball lightning must have caused that hole in the wall and caused that damage, when it could have been caused by something completely else, like kind of after the fact. So,
Yeah. And another thing they pointed out in the article is that sometimes electrical arcs can resemble ball lightning, because what's happening is, I mean, for a couple of different reasons. One is that an electrical arc can appear to move. I don't think that they said that specifically, but another really big thing is that because it's so bright, then basically like you can't see the arcing you can't just see the arc anymore. What you're just seeing is this kind of like diffuse
am I there?
ball. Can you not hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, looks like Jeff's screen is frozen. All right, sorry, I'm kind of waiting for Jeff. Maybe, yeah, okay. Jeff left the studio. Um, and I'm reading the chat here. What's going on? Okay. I'm not even gonna try to respond to that. I don't know.
Am I working again?
You're working again. Okay. JKW Jewish in the chat, which is a very interesting choice of screen name, saying, I don't mean to be rude, but you guys don't have a clue. You haven't seen what can only be starfaring civilization.
Hmm.
Damn you fools. You mean like with a dental dam? Is that?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Like my browser froze and crashed for some reason.
No worries.
Hopefully it still works. So
Yeah. So anyway, what I was saying is that yeah, they point out how a something that is producing light may not actually be anything like a ball shape, but can just, you know,
yeah, it may just be the radiance.
the radiance will make it appear, yeah, spherical. Exactly. Thank you.
It's like looking at a FLIR video. Like it's the object doesn't actually look like that. That's its heat signature. You know, you're just getting the pattern of, you know, yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
Yep. I thought it was interesting that the different kind of psychological information they had mentioned that come into play with remembering this kind of stuff. And some of it actually does support that people, and this is an argument the author made elsewhere in a different paper, that trained people are actually fairly good at getting some, at least, of the core details right, at least immediately after a sighting, if not much time has taken place. They list different studies, but they mentioned they found that special details of a sequence of actions are better remembered. So the more unique kind of events tend to be better remembered. The central details of a scene are clearly remembered, even if they caused you fear. People tend to overestimate the duration of fearful or stressful events. So many times when you have like a UFO sighting or a ball lightning sighting, and people think it's actually longer than it really is. So they may report, you know, it was there for 30 seconds and it might have only actually been 5 seconds. So they could say it's been there for 20 seconds and it was only a couple of seconds. People misremember, they overestimate durations of events, you know, in kind of shocking, surprising, or stressful situations. Studies have also shown that observed details can be distorted based on suggestive questioning, also by personal and cultural stereotypes. So again, we can be influenced by the people that are asking the questions, and we can also just be influenced with what we kind of expect are predetermined kind of cultural influences and stereotypes that we have affect how we interpret kind of things. And they mentioned 2 other things here. Emotionally disturbing sudden events are often stored and recalled together with irrelevant details from the event situation. It's called flashbulb memory. And as well as incorrectly remembered details are further remembered this way, which is called kind of like a freezing effect. So, and all of these things kind of come into play when not just looking at ball lightning sightings, but any kind of like sighting, like a UFO sighting. And when we're looking at people's witness testimony, because, you know, they may report, you know, a sighting as being longer, and that might, you know, say to you that precludes it being a meteor. But maybe their time estimations are off. And if there is a known meteor that happened at that time in that place, you know, it's most likely going to be that. And as we've known, looking at like some of these mass sightings and meteor events or rocket reentry events, people will report the times. You know, there'll be a wide range. Most people will get it, you know, within, you know, a couple of minutes. But there will be some people that will report a meteor sighting or rocket reentry sighting will last 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And that obviously did not happen. So you have to take all this kind of stuff into consideration. But yeah, mostly they just, you can should be kind of quite obvious that ball lightning events share a lot of similarities with investigating them as investigating kind of UFO sightings. And many ball lightning actual sightings, could just as easily have been reported as a UFO sighting or a ball lightning sighting. Many have been reported as being kind of almost endowed with, intelligence, seeming to make, intelligent movements. There's reports of ball lightning going into airplanes, kind of coming in through the fuselage, kind of like going around the fuselage, look like it's checking things out, before like going out the window again and leaving. So that could just have easily been reported as a Foo Fighter, sighting, as it could have been reported as a ball lightning sighting. So there's a lot of, I think, phenomenologically similarities here to ball lightning and UFO events.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think that basically studying ball lightning is pretty much methodologically identical to studying UFOs, from trying to determine what UFOs are, because basically, I mean, any ball lightning report really could be could be treated as a UFO report pretty much, because there's no way to determine whether or not it's ball lightning, and I mean, we don't even really know fully what the parameters of ball lightning is, if this is more than one phenomenon, and what sorts of phenomena it includes, stuff like that.
Whole bunch of explanatory theories that people are coming up for, and then the whole thing is they argue is that there's too many explanatory theories, not enough actual field research to match things up, with theories. So everybody's coming up with ideas of what could theoretically possibly explain them. And we see that with ufology. We've got a lot of hypotheses that people have for where these things come from, crypto-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial, interdimensional, et cetera, but not a lot of people actually trying to match, these theories to field studies and examinations. But they give some good advice that is, like I say, it's pretty similar for investigating these as you would for a UFO. They kind of first suggest you categorize a report into, kind of what you can do with it. One, is it a error? Is it a misidentification, a fraud, or clearly some other phenomenon, at which point you can kind of dismiss it? B, is it inadequate information, or is it a secondhand report? So is it like, my grandpa told me once he saw something or other, at which point, as an investigator, there's not a whole lot you can do with investigating that. And then he says, but then if you get through your filter process, you get down to, class C, which is that there's sufficient details for further examination. And in these cases, if it's recent enough, you should do a field investigation, and direct contact with the actual main observer for direct questioning is mandatory in these kind of situations. They say that because these interviews are voluntary, you should treat the witness with respect and be polite, and you shouldn't come off as like you're interrogating them. And something that I also agree with, the best situation for doing these interviews is meeting the eyewitness as returning to the site of observation. Because if you're at the site of observation, then the witness can actually point out to you, like I saw it, like right there, it moved from here to here, and you can do calculations. And it helps jog their memory. If they're actually there at the site, you can have them kind of relive the experience. And so if they're, for when they're talking about the duration, like how long an event happened, instead of having them tell you like a time, you just have them relive it. So like you start a stopwatch, like, okay, tell me when you saw it and when you stopped seeing it. And then you see how, just indicate like, saw it, I didn't see it now. And then you can get a better time, and so you can kind of relive the experience with them and hopefully get more accurate and kind of reliable details. And so I agree, returning to the site of observation, I think is important. It not just helps you get better details and helps with your investigation, it helps the witness recall and get a more kind of accurate recollection of what happened, which kind of really helps. And they also just give other general advice like that I've talked about with UFOs. It doesn't really do a whole lot of good to ask people for size estimates, like in centimeters. It's better to use comparative things. Like, so for ball lightning, they talk about like, comparing it to the size of a soccer ball. So somebody might have an idea of what a soccer ball looks like size-wise, but they don't know that it's 21.5 centimeters. So it's better to use comparisons. So it's like with a UFO sighting, you don't want a size, you want an elevation, you want a direction it happened, and you want maybe a comparison to something else, like it looked as half the size of the full moon, or it looked like a quarter at arm's length, in size. Something that you can actually then use to kind of reverse what the actual size might have been if you have enough details.
Just a tangent to that. They specifically talked about this experiment where basically they would have people to try to estimate these balls, kind of to see how accurate people are at estimating the size of ball lightning, and they got surprisingly accurate results. Like 90% of the time, it was pretty reasonably accurate, or something like that.
Yeah, they would have them step into a room just like real quick before sending them right back out of the room, and then ask them what size they remembered the object being in the room. And most people were fairly accurate at that. They point out that their sample base was educated college students, but that it probably extends to other people as well. But most people tend to be pretty good at giving comparative size estimates in quick situations like that at the time. But
and another, so before we move on to the next chapter, which is going to be talking about something called saucerification, I believe.
The saucerification.
Yeah. I want to talk, I wanted to bring an analogy to ball lightning, which is ball lightningification, because I like the term, Hynek's term, nocturnal lights. I don't really like Hynek. I did when I was younger, but not no more. But
BOLs, the ball of lights. Yeah, BOLs.
Oh, well, nocturnal lights. I think that's that's a much better descriptor for a sighting, even if it happens during a storm or something like that. If all you're seeing is sort of a point source of light or a ball of light, that could be a lot of different things, causing that to happen.
Yeah, a lot of the times they're power, transformer arcs that happened, or high transmission lines that arc and create balls. Like a lot of the famous videos that have came out in recent years, did have they're not necessarily fake, but they had prosaic explanations like that, like a power transformer overloaded.
Or it also could just be like something that's reflective. It could be a balloon. It could be
a Mylar balloon.
Yeah, or it could be a bolide, or it could be a bird hit by lightning, or it could be an aircraft, seen from a distance. And there's all sorts of things that can generate a nocturnal light type experience.
Yeah. And just like UFOs, spontaneous photographic material of ball lightning is rare because it's practically impossible to capture a 5-second phenomenon. If that, most ball lightning is, less than a second, 1 to 2 to 3 seconds. After a moment of shock with the camera, and you have the same kind of thing with UFOs, you hear people like, well, why didn't you take a picture? It's like, oh, well, I was shocked. And by the time I could have grabbed my camera and got it out, I just didn't have time to take a picture. And it's the same situation, with UFOs. Most events are so quick and transient that people, just don't have time to pull out their camera. Or cameras, and when it comes to things like ball lightning, a lot of cameras are just kind of inefficient to be able to capture events like that, because of the way the rolling shutter works. They're just not good for capturing lightning in general. One of the ball lightning example videos in the video I shared today on Twitter was you could see kind of this ball that kind of moved and kind of exploded away, but you couldn't see the lightning. because of the way the camera couldn't record the lightning strike that actually had struck down there at the time and hit a transformer and blew up. So you could just see the ball of light. You just couldn't see the lightning in the video because the rolling shutter effect, like the lightning's so quick, like it can skip it, in one cycle as it goes through. So a lot of it's just not equipped for very fast events like that.
OG Skywatch, who, is a person in the live chat with screen name OG Skywatch, says that they saw a fleet come down out of space and the orbs jumped around using instantaneous hypersonic speed, and I got 3 photos of it. So were they making like sonic booms? Like if it was hypersonic, then they would have been making sonic booms.
Pretty loud.
Yeah, it must have been. I don't think that, not to dismiss your experience, because you may have actually had the experience, but I don't think that it's possible for a person to tell if an object is coming out of space,
Yeah.
because like it could just be coming from high in the sky,
Yeah.
No sound. Okay. So you're just saying they were moving around really fast, is what you're saying. All right. Okay. So let's move on to the next chapter.
Cool.
You said you had slides for that?
Yeah. Slides.
Well, you might have to add them again, I think.
What?
That disappeared when you left the studio. Sorry. It's not my fault.
It's totally the Men in Black.
Mm-hmm.
Booyah. So this next chapter,
we were jumping.
Yes, it's called Very Close Encounter with the UAP in Levitation by Eric Malloy.
Hold on a second. So OG Skywatch is saying that they were jumping. I'm wondering if what you could have seen is objects that were reflective, right, rotating, or moving back and forth in the sunlight. That can, if you have, like, for example, a boon release, and the boons are, or a balloon release, and the balloons are reflective, it could be.
Yeah, there's also some well-known visual perceptual illusions which create kind of a jumping effect that have to do with, like, when lights change different intensities next to each other, they can appear to create jumping patterns, but it's actually just like nothing's actually moving. It's just different lights dimming in and out and changing intensity. I don't remember the name of the exact effect, but there's the flash leg effect and the Froelich effect and various effects like that give the appearance of objects appearing to jump in position. Just like they can give the appearance of objects flashing or rotating when they're not actually rotating. And it just has to do with changing intensities and contrasts of the different lights that are happening. And you get this with stars and stuff all the time.
Well, a CE1, I think you mean a CE3 OG Skywatch. But yeah, so they're saying that they got a streak in one of the photos. But okay, well, anyway, let's move to the next chapter.
Yes, so this chapter, Very Close Encounter with the UAP in Levitation, and just the abstract here, and this is chapter by Eric Malloy, and I apologize for mispronouncing names here, but Jean-Michel Abrasat. And the abstract is that the Amaranth is a very famous French close encounter of the second kind that was officially investigated by Japan in 1982. It is still generally considered unexplained because of the duration, the proximity of the witness, and some alleged physical effects on plants. Working within the conceptual framework of the psychosocial model, we put forward in this article a mundane explanation. After looking for more than a decade for unpublished original documents, we have found new information that support the hypothesis that a mylar balloon was the real cause. We present a coherent scenario and analyze the perceptual mechanisms that led to this case. Based on those, we think that it should now be regarded as properly explained. Now, this case, the Amaranth case, is, if you recall, the Valençol case, and we talked about how the Valençol case had what was called a D rating or a pan D rating, and that is essentially the Blue Book equivalent to an unexplained. It means that after investigation, Japan was still unable to come to a determination of what it was. And so just like Valençol, this case was given a category D rating. And this case initially investigated by the gendarmerie before it was investigated by Japan. And just like we were just kind of talking about how the problem with a lot of cases is that you don't have enough time to kind of take a photo. However, in this case took about 20 minutes, as Rachel was earlier saying, and he actually tried to get a photo but was unable to get a photo. And so one of the things is people argue that how this was caused by a perceptual illusion. How can the event happen for so long? But as you know, there are cases where perceptual illusions can last that long. But let's just start giving a quick explanation of the case. This case happened on October 21st, 1982. And most of our information comes from a technical report called Note Technique number 17 that was written by Jean-Jacques Valesco, who was head of Japan that year. And this happened in the Nancy district of Meurthe-et-Moselle in eastern France. So on October 21st, 1982, Henry, a 30-year-old and cell biology researcher, he lives in Laxau. This is the Nancy district of Meurthe-et-Moselle, eastern France. And this is kind of the front of his home here. And this is kind of like just a map of kind of like the area. And this is a kind of a diagram of his yard and the garden here. And he's at his home and he's deciding to do some gardening. At 12:33, Henry looks up and sees something in the sky. Plane is the first thing that comes to mind, but then he realizes that a UFO is flying towards him. The bright spot becomes a round shape. It stops near him, levitating 1 meter above the ground. And so this is the kind of object that he sees. It kind of has a two-tone kind of color, kind of a metallic kind of look up there. And it's kind of got these kind of flat edges there on the edge. Henry evaluates this object at the diameter at 1.5 meters and the height is 0.8 meters. Henry then goes to fetch his camera, but it does not seem to work when he gets back. He approaches the UFO and looks at it closely. He says hello to it in different languages, but he gets no reply back from this object. At 12:56, the UFO flies away just as silently as when it arrived. Henry then gives his testimony to the gendarmerie, which does a preliminary investigation from October 22nd to October 27th, 1982, which leads to the full-on Japan investigation. Now, what kind of made this case famous and why it's called the Amaranth case is because of the effects that it allegedly had on this Amaranth plant that was kind of in the area, in his garden here. This diagram kind of just shows how this object supposedly came in and kind of landed in his yard, just kind of hovered there for this 20 minutes before it kind of just took off quickly. And these pictures came from that Japan document. We do not have the original report. It's not been released online. We only have basically this Note Technique, which is a summary kind of report of the case. And they had this garden essentially had these amaranth plants that were growing all in the center here. And these kind of red circles that are kind of on the corner are where there is these hollyhock plants that were growing. And the diagrams in Japan's report, one of the kind of points this article is kind of the problems in Japan's investigation, kind of the errors that they made. And some of their diagrams in their own report kind of don't even kind of match up there. But we don't know where some of these other hollyhock plants were that are kind of in the middle there. So these in this case, these amaranth plants, and this is amaranth. To be honest, I'm not a gardener, so I had seen these before, but I didn't know that these were what amaranth was until I kind of had looked into this case. And so these are the amaranths that he had growing in the center of his garden. And these are hollyhocks, and they can grow quite tall. They can grow as tall as a man. And you can see in this person's garden, they've got these hollyhocks growing. And so this guy's garden, he had hollyhocks growing basically in the three corners. He had some amaranths growing in the center of the garden, and at some point with the amaranths, he also had some other hollyhocks that were kind of growing in the center of the garden. And but the hollyhocks really aren't kind of, there's a reason it's not called the hollyhock case. It's called the amaranth case because supposedly the UFO that was above these amaranths caused them to kind of wither and kind of die away. Unfortunately, like many of these ground trace cases we have, there's no real reason to believe these dry plants had anything to do with the UFO. In fact, it was quite common for the time and environment that these plants kind of would have withered away and kind of dried. There was nothing really particularly totally abnormal about them. And this is they kind of one of the problems of the investigation here was so in this photo it looks pretty clean, right? Like the ground is all picked up. This is kind of after all these plants have been removed. And one of the issues is when Japan was coming to collect samples of the amaranths to perform tests, this guy who was a cell biologist who should know better than this basically dug up the garden the day before, which not only would affect the samples that they were collecting and the cellular structure and the chemical analysis of the samples. You also have to wonder why he would do that, right? So when Japan got on the scene, in this later photo here, this garden looks pretty clean. But in fact, when the gendarmerie first kind of showed up, the garden looked like this. The plants were still kind of everywhere and hadn't been picked out and cleaned out yet. And so this photo was taken like I think 80, pretty much I think like the day after the event happened. And this photo kind of hadn't been seen for a very long time, I guess. They found it later on. And as part of one of the arguments to make is that a lot of the times with these cases that if we had the information back then that we had now, then this stuff could have been solved back then. They kind of point out some of the kind of deficiencies. Also, some of the deficiencies they had in the investigation was that Japan never made kind of any effort to do any sort of psychological test on the witness, for one. They also didn't do any sort of kind of visual acuity test to check this guy's vision to see if there was anything wrong with his vision that could have affected the perceptions during this kind of encounter. But interesting, the guy Velasco, who was head of Japan, would say that this was, one of their kind of best cases that they've investigated. He says in many interviews, this is one of the best Japan investigations ever. And it shows that the phenomenon interacts with the environment. So they seem to have done very little investigation. Unfortunately, this is, like many cases, a single witness case. They made no effort to look for any witnesses, despite this being in town, in a city. You would have thought that if this event was really happened and there was this object hovering there, it could have been seen by some of the neighbors. Apparently, they made no effort to look for any other corroborating witnesses. They took no effort to kind of have the witness evaluated by a professional to look for any sort of psychological issues. They didn't have his vision looked over. They kind of made the mistake a lot of people do, is that when they believe there's some sort of physical evidence, they kind of jump straight to that, ignoring all the other factors and issues and investigation they should have done, because I think you get kind of excited, like, we got some physical evidence here. This is something we can actually test, something scientific we can look at. And so they missed out doing a lot of, I think, basic preliminary investigation that they should have done, and that they overlooked in this case. Now, they kind of looked at this thing from a psychosocial kind of perspective, trying to come up with a solution as to what it could be. But first, they kind of wanted to dismiss whether it was kind of like a hoax or a hallucination, and they determined that they don't think that it was a hoax because the witness didn't try to become famous, he didn't try to make any money, and secondly, he went to the gendarmerie himself directly. And they don't think it's likely that somebody would report their incident to the police if they were lying or hoaxing or making something up, because that would potentially cause problems for them and they could potentially be in legal trouble. And thirdly, they felt that the story was atypical, that if he was just trying to hoax the case, then he probably would have incorporated more typical elements that you normally hear in UFO stories. Perhaps a close encounter of the third kind, something a bit more sensational, and that would be more likely to get kind of media attention. The fact that his story kind of didn't contain some of these kind of elements indicated that they didn't think he was really a hoaxer. The other kind of possible explanation was he kind of hallucinating, and they make a point, kind of pointing out something that I repeated several times on this show, is that most cases aren't hallucinations. Hallucinations kind of are defined as, perceptions that did not have any sort of stimulus, whereas illusions are perceptive stimuluses, distortions of actual objective stimuluses. And like I said, in most cases, we're talking about perceptual mistakes, illusions of things that were actually physically there that they saw with their own eyes, not outright hallucinations. And so while it's possible that there could have been a hallucination kind of aspect to this, and some people have suggested that, most cases aren't hallucinations, and so they dismiss that kind of theory. And so they move on to try and come up with what could possibly have caused the perceptual illusion. And their hypothesis, as Rachel mentioned earlier, was this mylar kind of balloon hypothesis. But the issue was, again, this event happened for 20 minutes. How did a balloon kind of stay stationary in this one spot for 20 minutes without kind of flying off? You would think the balloon would have to be somehow attached to something or caught up in something. And so when you look at this photo here, be hard to, they couldn't really find any points per se that this balloon could have been attached to that would have kept it there in place for 20 minutes. That there's like a clothesline and some other things, but there was nothing really in the exact point per se that could have anchored the balloon. But again, the problem is this photo is after he cleaned the site up, a couple days later. But for the longest time, I guess this is all people really had to see was this photo, and they could not see any kind of place that a balloon could either be anchored to, or I think more specifically, not that somebody anchored it, but that it got kind of caught up. So like a balloon came in and it kind of landed, and maybe it had a string and it got caught up in the hollyhocks, or just the balloon kind of got caught up in the hollyhocks there. So when we, finally got, and this is an image is taking this photo, this kind of clean photo, overlaid with where they think this kind of balloon or UAP kind of may have been, kind of hovering there. But once you get to see this photo of what it really looked like at the time, you can see that there's a lot of tall plants and, vegetation and things that, this object could have got caught up in. And so this object the balloon could have came floating down. Maybe it had a string, maybe it didn't. It gets kind of caught up in the plants. And after about 20 minutes, due to changes in temperature and the sun, the balloon expands or whatever and gets enough buoyancy to leave its position, and it takes off again and it leaves again. And so that's basically the theory. And one of the things I wondered too is that so the gendarmerie kind of showed up, and he gave his testimony to them only 5 hours after the event, and then they showed up, and surely they because these are the gendarmerie, this is a photo from the gendarmerie, they would have noticed these other hollyhock plants. And so why these hollyhock plants must have been closer to the UFO, or at least as close to the UFO as the Amaranth plants. Why would they not withered away and dried? Why did you not mention the hollyhock plants as being damaged? You know, surely they must have suffered the same damage as the Amaranth plants did. But that's not really mentioned. And the Japan takes samples of the Amaranth plants. But as we see, he kind of went and removed all those plants before they came, between the gendarmerie coming out and when the Japan came out to take samples and for testing. This is a photo of this object kind of overlaid on top of one of the old gendarmerie photos. And they make a point that it's kind of also surprising that there's only supposedly 3 photos that were taken place, that were taken by the gendarmes when they were on site. And they're all in black and white. And this is in 1982. So, you know, color film and stuff you'd think should have been prevalent at the time. So it's unclear why they have so few photos and why they're so poor and that they're, you know, not actually in color. And for to kind of support the Mylar balloon, they explain that, so this kind of ledge here we see in the drawing, Mylar balloons, when seen from certain angles, can kind of create these illusions of a kind of a flat crown around the edge. And they suggest that this kind of contrast illusion is what made the witness kind of believe there's kind of this flat crown kind of around the edge there. And this, again, is a photo, I guess, of these plants, these dried up kind of plants that they had there. Yeah, so again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that the UFO affected these amaranths and not the hollyhocks. I kind of also find it a little suspicious that he removed all the plants personally, kind of dug up that area and cleaned it up before Japan came out and collected the samples. But as I said, like many of these cases where there's supposedly physical trace evidence on the ground, like in a field or in a garden, a lot of the evidence, there's no reason to suggest that could have came from the UFO. This plant damage and withering could just as easily have been caused by just the basic environmental factors kind of at the time. Balloon. I guess one of the other thing they kind of mention is just kind of talking about again kind of our mental models and how we kind of like look at things and perceptual mistakes. And one of the examples, you know, they kind of like give is this example of how in magic, when we see something that, you know, we may not believe it, but then we kind of see it. And because we can't see any other kind of like easy, simple explanations as to what's going on here, it seems kind of amazing with us. And we kind of sticks with us. And they give this kind of example here of the kind of the street performers, the elevating street performer that you see appearing to just kind of elevate here, just holding a stick. And when you look at this guy, you think like, well, how can that stick be holding him up? I mean, he's just holding him up by his wrist. Your wrist can't be that strong. Like, there's no way this could be holding him up. But that's just because we don't really see what's kind of going on kind of underneath. Like, on a quick glance, like to us, it looks like a man levitating. But what's really happening is this guy's sitting on a weighted platform. That stick of his is a metal pipe that is connected to this, basically a metal plate that the guy is sitting on, and that his arms resting on. And so he's not levitating. He's sitting in a chair that is disguised to look like a cane, basically, that he's just using to hold himself up with. But it's but on first glance, we can be confused and think something's levitating. And
Yeah,
there's
it can be like it might actually. Oh yeah, I think that picture shows it. Yeah, like there's actually a bar going off and around.
Yeah.
Under his clothes.
Yeah.
So he's not just holding on to that one thing. He's actually has supports under his clothes.
Yeah, it goes around and back him, and there's usually a secondary metal plate that he's actually sitting on, that's connected to him. And yeah, so he's really just sitting on a hidden chair that you can't see because it's hidden in his clothes and in the bar or the stick that he's holding on to. So, and they explain that there are perceptual illusions that, some perceptual illusions last short periods of time, but there are perceptual illusions that last long periods of time. There's people that have looked at the moon for 20 to 30 minutes, convinced it's not the moon, that it's something else. So there are long-lasting perceptual illusions. There are even perceptual illusions that even when you know it's an illusion, you still see it. There's some that once you know it's an illusion, it breaks the illusion. You can't see it anymore. But there are some that even when you know it's not real, like no matter what you do, you still, the illusion persists. The perceptual distortion persists for a long period of time. So while it may seem weird that a guy could take a 20-minute balloon sighting and turn it into a UFO that damages plants, I mean, it's still possible because there's also a lot of other interesting kind of weird things with this case. For example, like he was so close to it, but he never made any effort to actually kind of touch it or to get closer to it. He supposedly went inside to get this camera, but it didn't work and he couldn't take a picture. Lots of things that kind of imply that this experience was more, I guess, more perceptual, a more perceptual experience than it was a truly anomalous event. And they do point out that Mylar balloons at the time, that they did exist, but they were not as well known as they perhaps are known now. In fact, the Pantone color scheme that this guy kind of outlined as being the colors of this object, two-tone Mylar balloons did exist in that color scheme at the time. Some discrepancies were the size he described the object as being like 1.5 meters, when most of these balloons, I believe they say, are only like 0.9 meters, not 1.5 meters. But again, with things like there's going to be a little bit of variety as far as accuracy, when given a size estimate, particularly given it in actual like numbers like that, as opposed to like a comparative kind of a thing. I guess this guy's whole backyard was only a couple meters wide. So, I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't have described it, comparing it to other features, but I guess he just gave this estimate of 1.5 meters. So it's a little bit bigger than these balloons tend to come in, but it's, again, not outside the realm of possibility. But unfortunately, with a lot of these cases, we'll never know 100%, because there's a single witness case and it happened so long ago, and the way the original investigation happened and the flaws they made in the original investigation, kind of at best we can do is to come to a probable identification. And they argue that this case should be moved from a pan D, which is the non-explained, to if not explain, at least a probable explanation of a Mylar balloon, because it's at least feasible, but that it's unlikely to actually happen because, like a lot of these kind of cases, this has become a classic case in French ufology, kind of considered one of the best cases. Like I mentioned, the Pong guy says it's one of their best cases, one of the best investigations. So it would be kind of like reclassifying Roswell as a weather balloon. It's just not going to happen for a lot of people. You're going to make a lot of people angry if you reclassify the case as potentially identified. So it's really going to be up to the person to decide if they accept a Mylar balloon explanation. But what they're trying to do, as they explain with the psychosocial model, is that the idea working within the theoretical framework of the statistical model, we will discuss a possible mundane explanation for the case. So the kind of idea is that because we don't have evidence that we yet to date don't have evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, that these UFOs are alien spaceships, for example, but we do know that, perceptual errors occur. We do know things like balloons can cause, wildly sensational UFO stories. Like, we do know these other things happen, even though they may be rare. The most rational way to approach this is to try and come up with a mundane explanation for the sighting. And in this case, they came up with a mylar balloon explanation.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that we don't actually know what happened, and that's just mylar balloon explanation. Basically, what it serves to do is to show that there is a more plausible explanation than
NHI or aliens or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's the right one. It just means it's the most plausible given the information we have.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that this could have been some sort of hallucinatory experience potentially too. Because the thing is, it's really common for people to report like orbs and stuff like that, like in their bedrooms and things like that don't seem to correspond to conventional reality that could be explained as hallucinations and or as that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
because they never investigated or put any effort into like checking out this guy's, even his vision or any psychological, we have no idea like what this guy could have potentially experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it also, it reminded me of that one case of the guy in Ireland who, I think this was from like the 50s or something. He like saw a little red stripy saucer and he grabbed a hold of it.
Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, that was like Carey Island or something. Yeah, I remember that case. Yeah.
And he like fell over and it got away or something like that. I think what's interesting, another thing that I found really interesting about this case is just how weird my mylar balloons are. Because I had done a story on the last episode, I believe, that in the rebrief, where it was basically about how a mylar balloon caused probably several mylar balloons caused like a power fluctuation that basically turned off all of the pumps in the sewage board in New Orleans or something, in part of New Orleans, and a big part of New Orleans. And, just because there was a few mylar balloons ran into power lines, basically.
And that's just as random and weird as any UFO sighting.
Yeah. I mean, what's really bizarre about that is that this flying object was able to cause. I mean, what I found to be significant is that there was a flying object and it caused interference to electronic equipment.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is that the reason why it looked like a sort of traditional UFO to this guy wasn't because he was making it look more that way, but because if you turn a mylar balloon on its side, it is it's an oblate spheroid or whatever.
Yeah.
It's basically shaped like a saucer. It's literally a flying saucer. Well, maybe depending on how you use the term flying, but like in a more general sense, it's literally a flying saucer.
Yeah.
And if it actually went down the way that they proposed, this is really kind of a phenomenal, bizarre, and rare event that happened to this guy.
I mean, I will say not Mylar balloons, but I've seen balloons that kind of like will come down and kind of almost hover in place for a while, like because they lose air or whatever, and then they, maybe they heat up or whatever, and then they float off again. So like it does happen. It just seems so weird and random that people. I can see why people like, well, that sounds as crazy as any UFO explanation. That would actually happen, but it does happen. Like. The stuff does happen, and sometimes things do look like UFOs. And you had mentioned, earlier the saucerization of the stimulus, what he calls the saucerization of the stimulus. And like in this case, they talk about how this witness said they had no particular interest in the UFO phenomenon or science fiction themes. But even though that may be true, the truth is like we live in a world where there's no one on this planet that hasn't been culturally influenced by alien and UFO narratives, in media, advertising, fiction, etc. Even if you're not into the UFO topic or into science fiction, you're well aware of various UFO mythology and various narratives. And so even though he may have not been into this stuff, he can't help himself and can't help to associate this weird event he has with an alien object, a process which he calls the saucerization of the stimulus.
Saucerization, yeah.
Yes, and he says, indeed, a person need not have any interest in ufology or even science fiction to be culturally exposed to these UFO mythologies and iconographies. And so when this happens, so this witness kind of he says that he explained how the balloon basically warmed up a little, became able to fly because of the slightest turbulence of air between the houses, kind of dislodged it from wherever it got stuck, I guess, after it became more buoyant, and it just then flew off. The witness loses sight of the balloon. You can no longer see it in the bright blue sky, and it may not be because it actually went very fast, but because a balloon at a certain angle, if it's not reflecting sunlight, can just almost seem to disappear. And then when it hits the sun again, you can then see it again. And who knows what happened to this balloon. So Henry then succumbs to the influence of this kind of mythology of the flying object and goes to look for traces on the ground because he saw an object, maybe it left traces. You go to look for traces, you find some dead plants. This is all part of the saucerization process. Those plants, instead of dying from normal, lack of rain or, the heat or whatever, now you're thinking about it. Well, those plants must have been dead because of that object that I saw right above it. And so you kind of, reinterpret all this stuff kind of under that guise. And going back to the ball lightning, it's like what they would do with the ball lightning. You see a hole in the wall after a thunderstorm. Through your model, through that saucerization process, you think that hole must have came from ball lightning. In a UFO event, you think this ground trace must have been from the UFO, when that plant may have been dead the entire time. You just didn't notice it yet at the time. So they basically just end concluding that you only need one important bit of information kind of left out from a report for a case to become famous and for it to endure a long time in the UFO literature. It also illustrates the fact that sometimes perceptual illusions can endure and transform in the witness's mind a mundane object into something very strange and mysterious. And I've witnessed this personally. Like I've been with people that have claimed they're having sightings, and I can see the same stimulus they're seeing and not and I don't transform it into something remarkable, but I can see people next to me turning it into a UFO that's doing amazing maneuvers and other stuff. I'm like, wait a second, I don't see that at all. Like, what are you seeing? So it's entirely possible. And sometimes these things last a long time. So
yeah, like they pointed out in the ball lightning chapter, I believe. That basically like there are certain types of illusions that persist even if you know. Oh wait, no, it was in this chapter. Like even if you know what the illusion was and you know how it works and you know what you're supposed to be seeing, you will still continue to see this illusion. And in the ball lightning chapter, they did mention Kuhn and Thomas Kuhn's work. And what they were pointing out is that studying ball lightning fits a Kuhnian paradigm, basically that like there's puzzle, like there's puzzle solving, and there are specific criteria that you have to work within and specific rules that you basically need to follow in order to solve this sort of puzzle. And I think that works really well. But I also wanted to point out how Kuhn also talked about like Gestalt perception, and how we basically kind of construct this model of the world based on sort of our understanding of the world, and also how we go about trying to measure and understand it as well. Like different scientists and that come from different schools of thought within a field might use different methodologies for studying the world, and those methodologies will give them a particular type of model for understanding the world. It's really important to understand that what I'm proposing here isn't some sort of relativistic view of reality where the world becomes what you imagine it is or something, but rather really, right, people inevitably construct models of the world, and the way that we go about constructing models is going to inevitably determine how we view the world, basically. So, like, which I think fits it well into this saucerization idea, where you have an experience where you see something that's flying that doesn't really look like other things that you've seen flying before, and it does look like a flying saucer. Then and you're living in a post Kenneth Arnold world, then yeah, you're gonna your mind is going to tend to view that as being a UFO experience.
And they pointed out that, like I said, mylar balloons, while they existed at the time, they weren't as common and known as they are now. And they actually, I don't know if it was. So this chapter was the main author, Eric Meurthe. He had written another chapter fairly similar, which I actually got some of these images from before in French. And they also discuss it kind of in a different book. And so I don't remember if it was this chapter or his other chapter, but they discussed there are other cases where they were, in fact, at the time, like I think one case like 1979, another was in the early 80s, where mylar balloons were confused for UFOs at the time. So, this does happen.
Yeah.
And I think,
and I mean, yeah, like balloons, I think they have, there's a tendency to attribute, entityhood or whatever, or agency, or I don't think agency is the right word for what I'm looking for, but this kind of connects again to this concept of hyperactive agency detection. Because when I look at a balloon, I really tend to not think that it's alive, but to, experience it as though it's alive. You know what I mean? Like as though it's an entity. Like sort of like I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Red Balloon, or something like that, where it's like it's a short film from like the 60s, and it's this little kid like following this red balloon around like a city. I want to say it's in Paris or something like that, and the balloon is actually moving, with intelligent control. It's kind of leading this child around, which the way that I'm describing it sounds kind of horrifying, but it's actually kind of.
Is there an evil clown that pops up and kidnaps the child?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, and it doesn't like, grab a hold of him and then drop him from really high height or anything like that. But no, it's actually a very whimsical and like kind of like the way that I remember. I'm gonna have to watch it again because I watched it when I was a little kid. It's one of the first things I remember ever watching like at school or something. And I remember it being kind of like a fanciful and fun sort of movie, you know. Yeah, it's like Swink on the Cloud has seen it actually. And looks like Rich saw it too as well. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a pretty well known movie. It's like but it's a short film.
I didn't start watching a lot of movies until college or TV.
Yeah, but I think, you know, when I think about these cases, I think there's two ways that they're really fun for me. And one is, you know, coming across a case where it's like, what the heck is going on? And the other is like, you know, coming up with an explanation for a case that's really kind of fun, you know, but still at the same time, you know, within the realm of possibility, you know, right? And with this case, what I find really interesting is that I could imagine something like that happening to me. And then even if I was able to figure out what was going on, I feel like the illusion would still persist. You know what I mean? Like, and I would still experience it the way that I first experienced it. If I saw a Mylar balloon behave in a way that seemed,
well, this is probably why on TV shows,
like then even if I figured out, you know, like if I went out there and came close to it and was like, oh, I don't want to touch it because you know, you don't touch the UFO, but
you always touch the UFO. Forget anybody that tells you otherwise. Touch it.
Like even if I figure out, I was like, oh, there's like a string on it or something, you know, oh, there's a little, you know, nozzle on it, you know, then I would still be like terrified to touch it, you know, like it would still feel like an entity, you know, like in my garden, and I wouldn't be able to help having that experience. And so I think what I really like about this case is that even knowing that there could very well be just like a plausible and, you know, mundane explanation. First of all, that explanation is kind of fantastic, you know, like even though it makes perfect sense when you think about it and run through the events, you know, like, okay, so a balloon, you know, it cools down while at the same time the, you know, the weather conditions are changing in such a way that the balloon falls. And then it sits there because it's kind of being held in place by these plants. And then, you know, the humidity goes down, the sun comes out, the air in the balloon makes the balloon buoyant, and then the balloon rises, and it rises faster than it fell, basically. So it goes through this dance.
Yeah.
And like imagining what it would be like to be there in the presence of the balloon and to know that, you know, I could very well experience it as this strange entity from the sky and still have that experience persist, even if I figured out that it was a balloon. You know, the event happened is this very rare chance event. And that combined with this experience of it, with the experience is phenomenal, you know, figuratively speaking. It's amazing. It's kind of really fantastic.
But if you think about it, it's not. Once you dismiss the only reason this case became famous was the alleged plant effects, it's literally a pretty mundane sighting of relative insignificance.
Well,
the only reason it became famous was because of the alleged plants.
Right, but I'm not thinking about it. You know, I'm not thinking about it in a broader cultural, historical context. You know, I'm just thinking about it. But I mean,
I got to say, I'm not convinced this guy's not full of shit, to be honest. I don't trust the guy at all. The fact that he removed all the evidence right after he was told that they were coming out to collect data, the fact that he's a cell biologist, but somehow is utterly clueless about, how what he was doing would affect sample testing, how it supposedly he made an effort to, in audio recordings, like basically to ignore the hollyhocks and kind of act like they weren't even there almost. Like, I think there's just a lot of things to indicate that while it may not be an outright hoax, I think perhaps after the fact, the guy did a little cleanup to kind of make his story seem a bit more interesting than it really was. So there may have been an original stimulus, like he saw a Mylar balloon and stuff, but I also don't exactly trust the guy involved. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, but let's just set that aside for a moment and suppose that it happened the way that they propose it in the paper and in the chapter. Then I think in that scenario, I think that it would truly be a fantastic thing that happened, even though it was a Mylar balloon. I think, one, the chance occurrence and the factors that had to have made it come about, though they're all mundane, like combined together, right? It's kind of like it's not a very likely thing to happen.
I mean,
and I think that's really cool.
That for any balloon.
Well, right. Well, what I'm saying is that yes, all of the factors that happen are perfectly plausible to have happened, but what I'm saying is that right, the chances of a balloon coming down from some altitude into your backyard, sitting there for a while in just the right way that it looks like it's levitating, right, and then taking off, it's not going to happen very often. It's probably not going to happen at all to like 99.999% of people. Like it's a mundane occurrence that in the sense that it obeys perfectly reasonable physical laws, and it totally could happen. But it's also a fantastic sort of incident because it took a lot of factors for it to happen just in the right way for it to happen, for it to turn into basically a UFO report. And I think that's really marvelous.
Well, that's
but the other
UFO reports.
Yeah, and I think that the other aspect that makes it really cool in this particular case is that is that I know that it would be like if that actually happened to me, like I would be really amazed by it, even if I figured out what happened, and like figuring it out that it happened could even make it even more amazing to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm having a hard time describing what I'm saying because there's something very subjective about what makes something mundane versus exotic. I mean, we can think I think that we can define mundane in a couple of different ways. From like a scientific like studying like UFOs physically standpoint, mundane just sort of means like anything that could happen within known and accepted physics, pretty much. But there's a lot of things that can happen within known and accepted physics, and probably things that people wouldn't even expect would happen, and so I think that type of way of looking at the word mundane, or that way of using the word mundane, might not be very useful. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd argue the thing to learn here is not this case specifically. The case is just an example of some of the problems that come into play, and this case, just like they say, illustrates how having missing information can lead a case to, be called unexplained and more fantastical than kind of it really is. And that's why it's important, and I say this all the time, is to go look at the original kind of source documents and materials to see what's being left out of the original reports. Because many times when you actually go and look at the documents, you'll see that the narrative that's been told you this whole time doesn't actually exactly match up with what the original source documentation says. And all you need to do is leave out, one key bit of information. And many times this is probably intentional. And I think this is why some researchers won't share their, like, I'm big on open sharing of your files and your research and your archives with other researchers. But there's some that just won't. They won't share their files. They won't share their work. They won't share their research with other researchers. And I think that's because a lot of them have an invested interest in pushing whatever their famous case they're well known for is, whatever narrative they're pushing on Roswell or whatever, is that they don't want you to see all the information because it would kind of contradict kind of what they're telling you. And in this case, I don't think it's that anything was hiding from them, but because of the poor investigation, kind of like Jipan did in the first place, how a lot of these photos, weren't even available to investigators until many years after the fact. So when you have this incomplete information on a case, that can lead you to coming to bad results, sensational conclusions, and that's what makes a case famous. And once a case gets that point, many times it doesn't matter if you show the people those original documents, you show the people that actually, this narrative doesn't match up with the data and the facts we have. It doesn't really matter at that point. It's already kind of reached cultural mainstream, and there's no change in it. And just like in this case where they argue where it should probably be reclassified to at least probably identified, it's doubtful that will happen because of the kind of the status that this case has reached. So it's important to go back and look for that information. I can't tell you guys enough to go look at the original source material, see if you can figure out what's being left out, because many times that's where you'll find key bits of details that can kind of break open a case. And in doing the research I've done for years, many of the cases that I've looked at, I regularly come up with details that are just flat wrong in the books of people like Donald Kehoe, Frank Edwards, Edward Ruppelt, even J. Allen Hynek. Details that people repeat to this day because they haven't looked at the original data. So you need to go back and look at the original reports. Otherwise, you're going to end up with just the popular narrative version of a case, which by the time you've heard it in, like I say, your books or your TV documentaries, is usually pretty distorted from the actual events that occurred, whether intentionally or not. In many cases, it's people that are copy and pasting original researchers that left out important details of a case that could have been important to solving it. Some cases like this, it's just that they didn't do the research. They didn't get those details. They didn't do the work initially. So,
yep. Yeah. Another thing that I noticed about both of these chapters, I believe, a few times in the book, I've noticed they bring up auras. And I think that, that auras probably could account for some UFO sighting reports, but at the same time,
like migraine auras.
Yeah. But I don't think that they could account for that many. I mean, I've never had an aura, so maybe you can speak better to this than I can.
I've had many, but
like
they're more like, to me, more kind of amorphous, blobby shapes in your vision. That
like they don't really appear in the environment
as physical objects per se, that like distant from you.
It's just more like if someone threw paint on your, if your field of vision was a canvas and someone just threw paint on it or something like that.
I do more often not get auras, but I get visual effects, almost like fireflies, where it looks like little lights flying around in my vision all the time. but those are I wouldn't confuse those.
Yeah.
I wouldn't confuse them as being super distant though. Like if I'm sitting in a room, it just looks like almost like little quick fireflies are flashing in front of my vision. That has to do with my migraines sometimes.
Right.
But,
like it looks like
and
it looks
that's different than
it
auras.
looks like something is superimposed in front of your vision almost.
Yeah. It just looks like I said, it almost looks like fireflies flying in front of me real quick, like back and forth. But
Interesting.
yeah.
That's cool.
So I mean, yeah, there's I think they mentioned hallucinations certainly do happen, and there's probably are some cases where their hallucinations are some sort of like a migraine or some sort of like I've hallucinated when I've been sick before, but I think, like they said, I think they're probably rare. I think in most cases they're not going to be that. They're going to be something like a perceptual illusion that was based on a real stimulus. But for all we know, like I said, they never tested this guy's vision. We don't know if he had floaters. We don't know if he had, stigma. We don't know, how good this guy's vision was at all. We don't know if he, was suffering any stress or psychological situations at the time. Like, we just don't have any of these details because, unfortunately, once they saw physical evidence like these plants, like it seems like all that other investigation kind of dropped to the background and nobody thought about doing it. And I think there's a tendency to do that in ufology, is that we forget to investigate these other aspects because we jump straight to the physical evidence that we can actually test. Only when we test this alleged physical evidence, most of the time, pretty much all the time, it comes up basically, normal, mundane. The plants likely just died from heat or drought, and we saw that in the last two cases that I covered. Well, not the Mike 6s, but the Alvin Moore case with the tree that he thought was from a sky object hitting it, because he did the same thing. He found an object, so then he went to look for something, evidence around it. He saw a broken tree, just like the ball lightning. They saw a hole in the wall, or you see the plant damage from the UFO, and he assumed it was caused by that. But that tree was likely damaged just because of the drought in the area at the time. The Valensol plants that were damaged were likely just because of the environment conditions at the time. Most of these cases where we do have that physical evidence that excites us so much turns out to have utterly unremarkable kind of analytical results. So,
yeah, but I mean, I have to say though, if I saw like a ball of light fall out of clouds and then it hit the ground and it turned out that it was a bird, like I would be absolutely amazed by that. And I think that seeing something like that would, to me, be just as, awe-inspiring as seeing like a flying saucer.
yeah.
I don't know. That's just me, I guess. But it might even be more, to be honest, because like if I had an experience where it was just like the day the earth stood still guy comes out of his little craft, Klaatu, like I think that would be like, if something like that actually happened to me, like it would be might be astonishing, but it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be on the same level as seeing a bird struck by lightning. I think that the latter would actually be more impressive to me. I don't know.
Well, that guy better have pancakes for me, otherwise he can go straight back where he came from. Right now. So, all right.
Yeah, I think my new religion is plasma. No, I'm just kidding. That's in response to OG Skywatch here, who's saying UFOs are the new religion, and good reason, I guess.
My new religion is Daft Punk. That's my religion. I had to wear the Daft Punk shirt today because we were talking about a French case. So, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about Japon finally. Yeah, that's another point that they brought up, was that and which I think you mentioned earlier, that Japan, they will likely not change the status of the case because of the public pushback that would happen because of that.
And you have the former director saying it's one of their best investigations. So,
yeah, there's like a lot of social pressure there. But I don't think, yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I guess I don't know enough about Japan, to like say that. Like,
I would just agree that I think they need to release the report, the original report.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
I think that they should just release all of the reports, just like they said in the chapter, that should just all be public information.
Yeah, because they've done it for many cases, like Valensol and other places, but like this one, all we've got is that kind of note technique number 17, that kind of summary document, which is actually, I mean, it's pretty long, but it's not the full report. And they argue that considering how well known this case is, like how famous of a case it is, and how it's been given specific attention as being one of Japan's best cases, you would think that would be one of the cases they'd make the efforts to publicly release on their website, like they've done for the other cases, but they just have not yet for whatever reason.
So I wanted to, I wanted to also talk again about this AED, which they don't bring up really in the book. I mean, he does mention it again, but he doesn't. Basically, I think what he's doing, this is Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos, is he's describing the CE3 report as from an ideological perspective, basically, and saying this is the features of this sort of psychological syndrome, basically.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I think that it's probably not useful to call it a disorder if it's benign, but anyway, that aside, it really, like, this concept is really fascinating to me because it's kind of it's hard to describe, but I guess just because it's like you have this sort of, discrete sort of phenomenon, that all of these different people experience, and it's kind of fantastic. And what I imagine, what I would like to see of an AED, of an alien encounter disorder event, like, would be like that it happens spontaneously, like, like that something happened in the person's brain to cause them to have this experience. Like, I mean, because that's fantastic, but also because, well, that's actually the only reason. But I mean, well, I think that there's a part of me that wants to believe that something like that happens. That basically there's some sort of genuine experience, like that it's like the Hopkinsville goblins, I think that those were probably owls, and that the witnesses, they thought that they were stressed, it was dark, and these factors kind of led to them misinterpreting what they saw and exaggerating them.
There's like an escalation of hysteria kind of going on as well, in that situation where
yeah, there's an escalation of,
you get a group together.
Yeah, there's kind of these feedback loops going on between individuals, and there's a sort of what is that called, when you have a crowd of people, sort of like or a group of people, they kind of influence each other. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that something I don't know. I feel like it's fantastic. I feel like it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like all brain generated or anything. Like it's just like you're still interpreting real events just in a crazy kind of way. Usually, it's not that people are just making up this encounter entirely inside their brain.
Well,
like,
I mean,
really
okay,
it's just because of all those factors, the way they end up building it into their mental model, it comes out as a UFO event or as an alien encounter event.
yeah, I mean, well, people do have experiences like that that are hallucinatory or partially hallucinatory when they're awake, you know. I mean, there's, of course, the sleep paralysis experiences, which are kind of semi-wakeful sleep states where you feel like you're awake and you're actually kind of perceiving your environment. But you have this experience of an entity that could, you know, potentially even progress into an out of body experience. And there's also, you know, people have different kinds of experiences when they're exposed to, you know, when they're, you know, like because of low oxygen, you know, or having not eaten for a really, really long time and things like that, that you can see things like, you know, diminutive people or strange monsters and stuff like that while you're awake. And so I'm wondering, you know, I think that some of these alien related experiences probably happen for similar reasons for sure. Personally, OG Skywatch also mentioned self hypnosis that you know, and where I think that stuff like that happens too. Like for example, with that demonstration on TV with J. Allen Hynek with the
Amazing Kreskin.
Yes.
Yeah, the fake mass sighting. Yeah.
Yeah, where he basically just used suggestion to make people believe that they saw a UFO, and there was like nothing there at all. And so I do think that there could be sort of, I mean, obviously everything happens for reasons and causes. It doesn't just spontaneously happen for no reason at all. But I think that that AEDs could happen for those types of reasons. And so I think
one of the important points was though that it's not necessarily like you say pathological. Could be a singular one-time event that does not mean you're crazy or indicate any sort of like, you know, long-term mental health issues or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's always important to remember too that like generally speaking, uncanny and highly strange experiences are not really associated with pathology. There's a lot of ones that are beneficial, or you know, even not just benign but beneficial, right? Like bereavement apparitions, I think, are probably very beneficial for most people that experience them. You know, like people going through mourning, having experiences of being in contact with their dead loved one could be a very helpful experience to have when trying to cope with that, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep hoping I just start hallucinating Dorothy and she just lives with me as a ghost. I mean, I'd be okay with that personally.
Anyway.
Yeah. There's people that do start to hallucinate like dead relatives and stuff, like, and they think they're still alive, you know, like they still talk to them and interact with them and think they live with them still and stuff like that. And I think that's a bit too far probably from a mental health perspective, but
I mean, not necessarily.
But I can see a beneficial people that have this transitory kind of like, you know, after somebody dies, they see their relative, you know, saying goodbye to them, you know, at the end of their bed or whatever. You know, I can see that being helpful for someone. Like that's not gonna, You know, there's no need to lock somebody up for being crazy because that happened to them. That's not hurting anyone, you know. So
No, and it's an extremely common type of experience. It's
Yep.
like something on the order of like 50%, 40 to 60% of bereaved people have these types of experiences.
And while I personally don't think it's anything supernatural, I think it's probably just a coping mechanism or something you're generating to cope with the loss personally. But, I'm not going to, all the power to you. That's what you experience. And if it helps you and if you believe it, good for you. Hey.
Yeah, well, what I think is happening is that it's sort of like a phantom limb type scenario, but instead of a phantom limb, it's a phantom person. When you're very close to someone, you spend a lot of time around them. Basically, your nervous system is and your brain and your body is also spending all of that time, becoming accustomed to them and adapting to them. And so you have basically, I mean, for a lack of a better way of putting this, you have a part of that person inside of you, and you have a model of that person inside of you, like a sort of homunculus of that person. And so if a person dies, it's sort of like, basically, it's almost like an extension of them in a lot of ways, I think. And so when a person dies, that part is still left and that part is still alive. So I don't think it's I again think this, this comes back to my my belief system of non-duality, understanding both aspects from a non-dual point of view and a holistic systemic point of view. Like ghosts are real because that's what they are. The way that I've just described an apparition of a dead loved one, that's basically what I think a ghost is, like the most realistic version of a ghost. I think there's other forms of ghosts and phantoms and stuff like that, but like this is, I think, what I think a ghost is. Basically, ghosts are real, pretty much, but they take place in our experience, and they're real in our experience. They're not real out in the world or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the phantom limb analogy. Absolutely. Like I said, like after Dorothy last month died, like I'd still come in here singing songs sometimes to her or like talking to her because like I still expect her to be here. It's like a limp that you still have, like you walk in the room expecting that person or that animal in my case to still be there. And so you're like, you start talking like, and then you realize, oh, wait a second, they're not there. But it's kind of like having a phantom limb. You've had it for so long that they're still there with you. Like, and it takes a while to like really recognize that, like, wait a second, they're not there. Like you just, you're kind of you get on autopilot too, kind of sometimes, but yeah.
And that's the thing too, is that, like when we think about ghost lore, like ghosts often have these aspects to them, like they're fragmented, or they go through these like loops and stuff like that in fiction and folklore, or like, you got the stone tape theory. You go to a particular place and you have this particular type of experience, right? Like if you think about it from that perspective of, these experiences come out with our interactions with other people or with the environment, and what that does to our brains and our bodies. Like it kind of makes sense, because it's like, okay, yeah, this is a ghost to that person. It's not actually them, but it's actually like a representation of them. And there's like these important parts that are missing, or there are these parts that are distorted or wrong, and stuff like that. That's because we're misrepresenting, or we're only representing a dead person through the representations that we have that remain, which are faithful to that person, but at the same time they're like literally inaccurate, right? Because we can't actually ever accurately 100% model something in the external world.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to go watch Nigel Keel's The Stone Tape, British television horror drama series, the classic 1972 British television series, The Stone Tape. They also did a really good binaural audio BBC radio drama for The Stone Tape a few years back. That's pretty good. So, and there is a special on Nigel Neal in Fortune Times I was looking at not that long ago, talking about The Stone Tape. That was pretty interesting.
Cool. Well, I'm actually going to watch La Soucoupe de Solitude.
Nigel Keel is more famous for Quartermass, in case people are
with
that. But he also did The Stone Tape. So
similar kind of thing then, sort of paranormal procedural type.
Yep.
That was another thing I wanted to bring up.
Quatermass, not Quartermass.
Yeah, Quatermass, yeah.
My brain wants to insert an R in there because that's Quartermass is an actual word, but Quatermass is a name, and so yeah.
You know what I think is really fascinating is that the word 14 is spelt with an E and not an I. You know, you think about any name where you do that to, like,
that's
trying to think of an example, Freudian, right? Or Jungian, or I don't know how you say that, Foucauldian or Foucauldian. I can't remember how you do that with that. But in any case, in all of those examples, you put an I in there. The only name where you put an E after it is in the word 14. And it's like, why do people do that? But it somehow makes sense for some reason. But
I wonder why that came to be. I wonder if anyone figured out why that came to be like that.
I don't know, but there was a period of time where I literally thought that his name was spelled with an E at the end, even though, like, I look at it,
common last name.
you know, I see his name all the time, but I somehow imagined that it had like this Mandela effect type thing.
Yep.
But
we're in the alternate timeline. It was supposed to be with an I, but those
we came from a world
where authorities not getting things right. Yep.
Yeah, I should have turned the notifications off on my phone. Thank you all for attending this wonderfly scattered show. And
yes, very, very long show.
All right.
That does it. Yeah. If my back is giving out.
Oh.
This is a psychosocial book that's actually referenced in the Amaranth chapter in the Illuminations, the UFO Experience is a parapsychological event by Eric Rollet.
I really want to grow Amaranth because I just...
For the seeds, or...
well, no, I just love it, the plants, and it has, like, my favorite name. Amaranth is just, like, such a great name, but also, yeah, it produces those pseudo grains.
Yeah, the grain amaranth seeds,
which are really cool looking. I don't know. It just looks cool. I don't know. I'm gonna marry an amaranth.
I could put some amaranth in my house, replace the weeds with amaranth. Yeah, why not?
All right, and for our final story, Boston was hit by a nuptial flight of swarming ants. Monday, people reported swarms of millions of flying ants blanketing the streets of Boston. The ants perform a nuptial flight when winged male ants are produced and migrate away from their home colony in order to mate. According to Boston 25 News, Rosendale local Jaden Lassiter told reporters, quote, "My friend came to pick me up and her car was just swarmed with bugs. They were just like little bugs, and they swarmed all over her car," unquote. Before we go, if you enjoy this show, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our channel, Ufo Sunset. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos.
and come and join our cozy and intimate live chat. A great plus for joining the live chat is that you can give us constructive feedback live on the air, especially if we make any factual errors. You can also join our Discord, a temporary link to which can be found in the episode description. Here
That's
at
the
Ufos,
best way to get a hold of us. Discord. If you want to talk to us like same day, get on Discord. I'm always around. So that's the best way if you want to get in touch or ask questions.
Yeah, it's basically just us and some other person.
It's me dumping stuff all day
it's-
long on there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's me and Jeff, and then sometimes Rich.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all we need, just three of us. So.
Here at Ufos, our political and personal views are not the same, and the work of each of us is independent work. Personal views or positions expressed in individual pieces are not those of Ufos, who is not a person, perhaps an entity, and has no views, or the other hosts. Please be sure to check out our respective content. I can be found at the Earth YouTube channel. Visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com, or you will be abducted from your bed. And you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter or Facebook. Jeff Knox spends all of his time studying UFOs, except when he's sleeping, and he makes hardly any money off of it. Please consider visiting his Patreon page or his Ko-Fi page and becoming his patron or helping him pay for coffee, respectively. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Swink McLeod. Thank you, XRichX. Thank you, OG Skywatch. I'm not going to thank that one person with the offensive name. Thank you, Timothy Brigham. Thank you, Tim. Nice to see you, as always.
I work on UFOs in my sleep, too, for your information. I play UFO content that just downloads into my brain while I'm sleeping, kind of like that sleep programming learning method. So it's 24 hours a day over here.
I think, I think you are working on it in your sleep, actually.
Yeah.
Give me a second here. Sorry, my phone is just being Kremlin house today. Come on. No. There, yes. No. We have no budget here at Ufos.
That's right.
So I use my phone as a teleprompter. Okay. Jeff, do you have anything you'd like to say before we go?
I do have a thread for the Amaranth case on Twitter and Facebook that I retweeted earlier today. And I also posted on our Discord. I'll probably be updating that with some news sources for October when it comes time to repost it again. But you can find that there. And then I finally posted yesterday is when I posted the Mike 6 case that I talked about last Sunday. So if you haven't checked out that thread yet, you can go check that out on Twitter now, as well as the Donnybrook case I briefly talked about at the end. Those have been posted since last week. So yeah, check it all out.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cool.
And, speaking of the Amaranth case, I don't want just Amaranth. I also want an Amaranth case now. I don't even know if that's a real thing, but I want one.
You could make a briefcase.
Yeah, for your Amaranth.
Why not? You could take
on the go.
And you could make you could put it in resin on the outside of the case, so you could have a case that's got Amaranth, seeds, things all around. Yeah, why not?
It's made of Amaranth and it's for Amaranth. And maybe somehow I would be Amaranth too.
Maybe you could take the seeds and the plants and make a fiber, a synthetic fiber or plastic out of that natural fiber or cellulose, and make the case out of that. It could be totally all made out of amaranth.
Oh no, the day of the amaranths. Okay. Well,
Coming.
in the words of
I
the
always
disc,
thought those were weeds, Jonah. Like,
those are not weeds. Yeah, amaranth is the best. In the words of the disc, in time, everybody saucers.